When Elias Mercer appeared on the edge of Mirror Plateau in October 2021, he was barely recognizable, barefoot, emaciated, with long matted hair and draped in tattered rags in place of clothing. The man had vanished 4 years earlier in one of the most remote and inaccessible wilderness areas of Yellowstone, a man everyone believed was dead. But the most terrifying thing was not his gaunt appearance. The most terrifying thing was what his waterlogged journal recorded about those 4 years, about what had really happened in the darkness of the semi-subterranean cabin, and about the entity that had lived with him deep in the Yellowstone forest. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On July 25, 2017, the eastern forest area of Shoshone National Forest entered the peak of summer, but due to the steep terrain, limited services, and distance from Yellowstone's main tourist routes, hiker traffic at the Blackwater Creek trailhead remained low. Among those present in the vicinity that day was Elias Mercer, 32 years old, residing in Wyoming. A few days before setting out, Elias texted his sister that he wanted to temporarily escape the hustle of Jackson and spend a day exploring old trails leading toward Crow's Nest Ridge, an area he described as pristine, minimally impacted by humans, and ideal for the geological surveying he pursued as a personal hobby. At the last rest stop on Highway 14, the store owner recalled that Elias appeared very calm and well prepared. He carried a lightweight backpack, a handheld GPS device, printed topographic maps, and a phone with weak signal support, items typical of an experienced backcountry hiker. On the evening of July 24th, Elias stopped at a small diner near the Shoshone entrance, chatted briefly about trail conditions, and jotted a few more markers in his notebook. On the morning of July 25th, he left his lodging early, stopped at a convenience store to buy water, 2 energy bars, and fuel for his mini stove. Security camera footage near the checkout captured him paying in cash before returning to his pickup truck. About an hour and a half later, Elias's vehicle was recorded parked at the dirt lot of Blackwater Creek trailhead, where hikers are required to sign the register. The entry under his name read, "Expected return tonight." According to meteorological data, the weather in the area that day remained dry and stable in the morning, with moderate temperatures and no special warnings for flash floods or high winds. No tour groups in the Crow's Nest Ridge area reported incidents or unusual signals around the time Elias was in the forest. A couple from Montana later mentioned in an interview that they heard what sounded like a scream in the late afternoon, but quickly dismissed it as the sound of a predator animal. When Elias failed to check in on the evening of July 25th as agreed, his sister initially assumed it was a signal issue or that Elias might be in a section of forest too deep for reception. But by the morning of July 26th, after many hours with no sign whatsoever, even from the GPS device he always carried on every trip, the family realized the situation was no longer simple. They immediately reported him missing to the Park County Sheriff's Office and requested search assistance. Within minutes of receiving the report, search and rescue forces were activated. The initial response team quickly reached Blackwater Creek trailhead to begin establishing the search perimeter based on the last recorded sighting of Elias. From the time the camera showed him leaving his vehicle on the afternoon of July 25th, combined with estimated average travel speed for a hiker with a light pack in moderately steep terrain, the command team constructed a theoretical travel radius covering all trails leading up to Crow's Nest Ridge, as well as side branches extending deep into the eastern forest. This area was divided into 3 concentric zones, with the innermost prioritized for immediate survey, as it best matched the time Elias could have traveled before losing contact. Canine teams were brought to the scene, starting from the parked vehicle and following the direction Elias entered the woods. The dogs quickly picked up the scent and led the search team along the trail for just over a kilometer before veering toward low-lying ground near Blackwater Creek. However, at the point where the trail met the creek edge, the scent disappeared completely, most likely because heavy water flow from the previous evening's storm had diluted any remaining odor. This break prevented the command team from determining Elias's subsequent direction based on canine signals. In parallel with ground teams, drone operators conducted aerial surveys along rocky slopes, steep inclines, and high-risk accident zones such as slide gullies, talus fields, and sheer cliff sections. Hours of footage showed no signs of a fall, impact, or any personal items like a backpack, jacket, or gear that might have been left behind in an incident. Meanwhile, ground patrol teams meticulously checked both sides of the trail for footprints, surface disturbances, or any small items such as bottle caps, wrappers, or fabric scraps that could help orient the search. But no artifacts were found. The absence of any sign of returning to the trail, something an experienced, disoriented person would typically attempt, led the command team to assess that Elias had most likely continued deeper into the forest rather than trying to backtrack to the starting point. With no clear direction from initial data, the search area was expanded to 3 adjacent subzones: the eastern slope region, the dense forest strip along a side trail, descending into a small valley, and the low-elevation boulder field. Search teams were divided into smaller groups, sweeping in a grid pattern to minimize the chance of missing clues. However, despite continuous searching over many hours, the lack of physical evidence, no signs of trail return, and water-saturated ground from the storm left the first day's efforts with almost no new leads. Faced with this deadlock, the command team had to consider more specialized approaches for the following search day. On the second day, with both ground teams and drones still finding no direct traces, the coordination team shifted from terrain sweeping to behavioral analysis, cross-referencing all data with the Lost Person Behavior Database, a standardized model of how lost hikers respond when disoriented, built from thousands of cases across North America. According to this model, an experienced hiker like Elias, upon realizing he was off course, would typically head to higher ground to reorient or seek natural landmarks as reference points. In dense vegetation areas, they would prioritize finding temporary shelter, such as rock overhangs, fallen trees, or wind-sheltered rises, while waiting for weather improvement. However, when compared to what the search team recorded on the first day, Elias's apparent behavior did not match any of these patterns. The scent trail the dogs followed led downward to low ground beside Blackwater Creek. Contrary to the uphill direction a person trying to reorient would normally choose, drones and ground patrols had checked the natural shelter locations within the priority radius, but no evidence suggested Elias had paused there. No flattened grass, no back-leaning marks on rocks, no food scraps, or any indication of a rest spot. Similarly, turnaround points, or returns to the trail, common actions when disoriented, were absent. The damp, muddy ground along the trail from the July 25th evening storm created ideal conditions for preserving footprints in the early morning hours. Yet the complete lack of any reverse direction tracks further convinced the command team that Elias made no attempt to return to the trailhead or any easily navigable junctions. The behavioral analyst's summary report concluded, rather than following looping or curving paths typical of lost individuals, all evidence indicated Elias left the trail on a diagonal downslope trajectory. This was an unusual direction, as the terrain below Blackwater Creek is steep, concave, and leads nowhere near other trails, nor is it a path disoriented people tend to choose for regaining elevation. Notably, the lost person model also records that panicked individuals often move in short, aimless straight lines before tiring and stopping, but the broad area along the creek and dense forest below showed no significant footprints or disturbances, indicating Elias had paused, rested, or changed course midway. Synthesizing all factors: no uphill movement, no shelter seeking, no trail return, no corrective footprints. The behavioral analysis team determined that the standard lost hiker pattern did not fit this case. They downgraded the probability that Elias became lost due to natural factors and concluded that his direction of travel and the scent loss context reflected an abrupt behavioral shift incompatible with the natural response of someone attempting to self-reorient in the wilderness. This very anomaly forced the investigation to shift focus to another data source: all electronic devices Elias carried. If his behavior did not align with a lost person, then the timing of device shutdowns could provide answers about what happened in his final minutes before total loss of contact. They started with Elias's handheld GPS unit, which automatically logged position history at intervals and allowed precise determination of when the signal ceased. Data showed the GPS functioned steadily through the afternoon of July 25th, but abruptly stopped recording shortly after Elias left the trailhead. There were no signs of low battery, gradual signal degradation, or operational errors beforehand. The device simply stopped transmitting as if manually powered off or completely shielded by an object blocking transmission. Meanwhile, carrier logs showed Elias's phone lost all signal a few minutes before the GPS cutoff, highlighting the anomaly. Even without cell service, a GPS unit should continue logging position unless directly interfered with. The near-simultaneous shutdown of both devices led investigators to conclude that an event occurred within a window of less than 10 minutes, marking the end of the free movement state Elias was presumed to have maintained from entering the forest until that point. To check for possible surveillance or the presence of strangers in the area, investigators collected all traffic camera footage on routes leading to the trailhead from morning to evening on July 25. No vehicle followed or appeared near Elias's truck during his convenience store stop, nor did any vehicle enter the trailhead immediately before or after him. This ruled out a random encounter between hiking parties or an incident on the trail involving someone entering from the main access. Review of emails, work schedules, card transactions, and calls in the preceding days showed no indication Elias planned a long-term departure from his residence, evasion of obligations, or financial pressure. No unusual withdrawals, no travel bookings, no deleted communications. According to family, Elias exhibited no prior behavior, suggesting intent to detach from society or go off-grid for an extended period. This data supported the assessment that Elias did not voluntarily orchestrate his disappearance. With the GPS shut down in an unusual manner and the phone losing signal just prior, the technical analysis team formulated a working hypothesis. While moving along the trail or nearby, Elias encountered a situation that prevented him from continuing in an independent, self-directed state. The striking feature was the abruptness of this process. No gradual signal decay typical of battery failure or natural transmission loss, prompting investigators to question an external influence they had not yet identified. This, combined with the previously noted unusual downslope behavior, reinforced the conclusion that Elias departed the free movement state within an extremely short time frame, after which he had no further ability or opportunity to send any additional signals from his carried devices. In the following search days, with GPS and phone data providing no further specific direction, the command team decided to expand on-the-ground survey coverage beyond main trails, focusing on complex terrain features rarely used by hikers. Drones were deployed along the east-southeast axis of Blackwater Creek, where terrain transitioned from pine forest to low slopes and depressed ground. During one morning flight cycle, the drone camera recorded an area of unusual ground compression, the duff layer pushed aside in an elongated orbital pattern several meters long. Unlike tracks made by large animals and inconsistent with tire marks, since the area had no vehicle access. Specialists later compared this compression feature to common scenarios in missing person searches, but could not confirm it as evidence of a fall or dragging due to the absence of slide marks, scattered debris, or associated artifacts. Near the compressed ground, a ranger discovered a small cluster of old ash beneath a tree canopy, relatively well preserved due to limited rain exposure. The ash lacked characteristics of a typical campfire. No stone ring, no signs of large logs burned, no residual charcoal streaks from dry wood. It resembled a smoldering burn with fine multi-layered material, suggesting an origin possibly different from temporary hiker fires. However, the absence of food packaging, surrounding footprints, and abandoned items prevented investigators from linking this ash to Elias or the time of disappearance. In the northern survey sector, a trail camera set to monitor lynx populations captured a human figure on the night of July 25, not matching the exact time Elias was recorded on traffic cameras, but within the window he was in the forest. The image was blurry, partially obscured by branches, and at significant distance, preventing identification of identity, gender, or condition. Notably, the forest section where the trail camera was placed was not a common access road. The presence of a person there near the time Elias lost contact led investigators to log this as noteworthy data, but insufficient for establishing relevance. While examining the old ash site, searchers recovered a small piece of fabric caught on a bush, frayed at the edges with no distinctive color or pattern remaining, only worn synthetic fibers. Initial examination showed the fabric sample did not match descriptions of Elias's clothing when he left the trailhead, though environmental exposure and time-limited identification features. The surrounding area revealed no additional items or traces capable of linking the fabric to a specific event. After compiling these disparate findings, the command team concluded that although several anomalies had emerged, unexplained compressed ground, ash inconsistent with recreational camping, an unidentified human figure on trail camera, and a fabric scrap of unknown origin, all lacked direct connection and failed to form a coherent evidentiary chain. Therefore, there was no basis to treat these as indicators of criminal activity or to transfer the case to a criminal investigation. Search teams recorded the data as reference elements, but could not yet use them to guide further action. After more than 4 months of continuous searching, using multiple methods from ground sweeps, drone deployment, mobilization of cadaver dogs, to behavioral analysis, based on the lost person behavior model, the command team was forced to compile all collected data to reassess the feasibility of continuing search operations. The disparate clues that emerged in the early phase, including the area of unusual ground compression, the old ash cluster, the unidentified human figure on trail camera, and the fabric scrap of unknown origin, despite thorough examination, failed to form a sufficiently strong chain of evidence to indicate Elias Mercer's current location or a clear scenario of what had happened. All lacked temporal consistency, bore no distinctive victim markers, and were unsupported by any additional electronic or physical data. In parallel, the absence of personal items, no signs of returning to the trail, and no recorded communication activity from Elias's devices prevented investigators from establishing an expanded search radius based on a reasonable direction of travel. Assessments of the possibility of death due to hypothermia during the stormy night or an accident on steep terrain were also considered, but both drones and ground teams found no signs of a body, torn clothing, or long slide marks, elements that typically appear in fatalities in mountainous forest areas. The comprehensive forensic summary report concluded that no data proved Elias was still alive, yet there was also no direct evidence indicating he had died within the search area, resulting in his status being recorded as undetermined rather than presumed deceased. Legally, due to the absence of signs of conflict, violent behavior, criminal-related evidence, or the involvement of a third party, authorities lacked sufficient grounds to redirect the case toward a criminal investigation. The search team, operating under Wyoming search and rescue standards, determined that all feasible areas within the accessible radius had been checked at least twice, both on foot and by air. With personnel rotation frequency having reached its maximum threshold, and no new data to guide further efforts, search operations were required to cease per protocol. By the end of 2017, the Park County Sheriff's Office officially standardized all on-scene reports, positioning data, search maps, witness statements, and recovered evidence, then coded the case under WYCC 2117 before transferring it to the Cold Case Unit for archiving and awaiting new information. Closing the file did not equate to a final conclusion about Elias Mercer's fate. Rather, it reflected the complete impasse in the search process at that time, and the lack of any valid basis to continue deploying resources. On October 3, 2021, more than 4 years after case Bedia's, YCC 2117 was moved to cold case status with no further data related to Elias Mercer, a wolf gray population monitoring research team working under the Yellowstone Wolf Monitoring Program retrieved memory cards from trail camera systems placed along the eastern edge of Lamar Valley, where they tracked seasonal movement density of wolf packs and lynx. While reviewing the image sequence captured in September, one team member noticed a frame recorded at 2:13 a.m. on September 28. In the dark forest, under infrared light, the figure of a barefoot man appeared, limping across the edge of the frame. Initially, the research team assumed it could be a lost hiker or an illegal nighttime hunter, but the emaciated physique, uneven gait, and near-total lack of clothing raised suspicions of an abnormal case. Upon zooming in and increasing contrast, they observed that the facial features, despite being blurred by motion, matched significantly with images of Elias Mercer circulated in missing person notices 4 years earlier. Per protocol, The team forwarded all data to the Park County Sheriff's Office for verification. The digital forensics unit analyzed each frame and applied biometric comparison based on facial bone ratios, relative height, shoulder structure, and arm-to-torso length proportions. Although the infrared image quality fell short of high standards, the matching algorithm returned a similarity score of nearly 90% with Elias's biometric profile, a figure sufficient to treat this as a major lead. More critically, the camera location was confirmed to be in rugged terrain, more than 9 kilometers straight-line distance from the nearest trail, with no public access roads. The surrounding area consisted of dense forest combined with boulder fields, visited only by research teams or a very small number of highly experienced deep wilderness survivalists. No official trekking routes passed through, and no tourist itinerary reports were filed in the final week of September. The appearance of a barefoot man without gear moving through an almost untraveled area prompted investigators to rate the event's level of anomaly as extremely high. After re-verifying timestamp data, confirming stable camera operation, no device malfunction, and no tampering, investigators concluded the captured image was not a misidentification or the product of illegal hunting activity, which typically includes signs of support equipment or characteristic clothing. The technical team continued extracting full data from all cameras within a 5-kilometer radius of that location. Although no other camera captured the man at a clear angle, 2 nearby cameras detected blurred motion at overlapping times, indicating the subject was moving northward along a downslope path. These analyses prompted the Park County Sheriff's Office to immediately contact search and rescue teams to evaluate the possibility that Elias was still alive and required urgent assistance. By the afternoon of the same day, all image data was transferred to the Inter-District Investigative Analysis Group, where case WYCC 2117 had been archived. After re-reviewing the entire cold case file, cross-referencing timing and distance from the disappearance location to the trail camera site, and noting the absence of any other missing person reports in the area matching the time frame, the investigative team unanimously concluded that the individual in the photograph was highly likely Elias Mercer. Based on that assessment, the Sheriff's Office issued an order to reopen case WYCC 2117, directing the activation of a joint investigation team comprising SIR, Yellowstone Rangers, and technical analysis units to verify identity, locate the man in the image, and assess the current condition of the subject. The reappearance in trail cam data was regarded as a major turning point in the case, ending more than 4 years of zero traces and opening an entirely new avenue for understanding the timing, location, and state of Elias Mercer at the moment he was photographed. Immediately after case YCC 2117 was reopened, SAR forces coordinated with Yellowstone Rangers to launch a search following the inferred direction of travel from the trail camera data, focusing on the forested bands between the eastern edge of Lamar Valley and the Mirror Plateau highland area, a mixed terrain of boulder fields, moss meadows, and small intersecting streams. By late morning on October 4, 2021, an SR team observed an elongated drag mark on the damp moss layer, along with slight surface disturbances in the topsoil, leading toward a depression between 2 low pine clusters. Upon approach, they discovered a man curled up beside a rock outcrop, his entire body caked in mud and in obvious extreme exhaustion. Preliminary checks of facial features and height allowed identification as Elias Mercer, the individual missing for over 4 years. On-site medical personnel recorded Elias exhibiting severe dehydration, hypothermia, and weak but intermittently conscious responses with incoherent communication. Around his left ankle was a circular constriction mark, with skin damage consistent with prolonged metal abrasion, incompatible with fabric cordage or common vines hikers might use. His shins and knees showed multiple scratches of varying depth, indicating he had crawled or dragged himself over rough terrain for many hours. Notably, the mud adhering to his body was not uniform. Some patches contained mineral grains characteristic of moist, low-temperature hot spring soil, while others were the gray mud of high-elevation moss meadows, clear evidence that Elias had traversed multiple consecutive ecological zones before collapsing in this area. While transporting him to the medical staging point, an SR member discovered a thick, water-soaked but shape-retaining object inside a torn inner chest pocket of his rags. Quick inspection revealed it to be an old soft-cover notebook, warped at the edges and containing many yellowed pages. Inside were handwritten entries spanning multiple years, recorded with various pens. The SR team did not expand on the contents as it fell outside their scope, merely documenting it and handing the notebook to the on-scene lead investigator. The discovery location was promptly designated as the second crime scene. Rangers established a wide protection perimeter divided into 3 zones: an inner zone for collecting biological surface samples, a middle zone for documenting footprints, drag marks, and mud samples, and an outer zone to check for any abandoned items along Elias's path. Mud samples were collected from at least 4 positions, immediately beside the rock where Elias lay, at the 2 disturbance trails, and at the deepest depression in the moss layer. Broken or displaced vegetation was also recorded to reconstruct his route prior to collapse. A drone was deployed shortly afterward to aerial scan the area, capturing the full terrain structure, distances between disturbance points, and natural approach paths. No personal items were found beyond the notebook, and there were no signs that Elias had established any shelter in the area before being located. On-site specialists concluded that this location was not a deliberate stopping point for Elias, but merely the endpoint of a prolonged, uncontrolled movement process. With Elias Mercer's identity and survival confirmed at Mirror Plateau, all search operations shifted to evidence collection and sample analysis mode to determine his path, mode of travel, and the reasons for his appearance in an area with no designated access for hikers. The waterlogged notebook, believed to contain entries spanning multiple years, was regarded as the most significant piece of evidence recovered at the second scene. Immediately after Elias Mercer was removed from the second scene and transferred to the field medical facility at Lamar Valley Outpost, the forensics team began analyzing the first layer of data from biological samples collected from his body to identify water sources Elias had contacted in the period leading up to discovery. Samples included mud adhering to his feet, microparticles in the epidermis, hair samples, and tissue fluid. All were processed and extracted to detect signature water bacteria, microbial strains that typically thrive in hydrothermal or highly mineralized spring environments. Initial analysis results revealed the presence of 2 notable bacterial groups, one from the Thermocranes family and one heat-resistant filamentous bacteria, both indicators of hot, silica, and sulfur-rich water environments. These microbial groups are not widespread across Yellowstone, but are concentrated in geothermal water bodies with consistently high temperatures and low seasonal flow variation. The forensics team immediately cross-referenced these results with Yellowstone's geothermal hydrology map, which delineates individual spring clusters, pools, vents, and thermal outflows by microbial and chemical signatures. Many areas were ruled out at once, particularly springs in the Old Faithful, Norris, and West Thumb regions, as the bacterial strains there exhibit significantly different genetic structures that did not match Elias's samples. Several low-temperature springs in the Canyon and Mammoth areas were also excluded due to the absence of microcrystalline silica, a substance detected in both the mud and hair samples from Elias. After primary filtering, the map retained 4 geothermal clusters matching the sample characteristics, 2 clusters within the Mirror Plateau hot spring system, 1 deep cluster near the eastern edge of Hayden Valley, and 1 small cluster in the lower Mist Creek Basin spring belt. The forensics team conducted deeper analysis to determine the degree of fit between the microbial data and each cluster. Results showed that the Thermocranes in Elias's body matched springs with stable temperatures around 70 degrees Celsius, belonging to outflow channel types rather than large thermal pools or direct vents. This eliminated 2 of the 4 remaining clusters, leaving only those with continuous but narrow flows, featuring white rim silica sediment structures, a microcrystalline form confirmed by electron microscopy in samples taken from Elias's skin surface. Deeper cross-referencing revealed an additional key factor. The density of heat-resistant filamentous bacteria in the samples indicated Elias had contacted geothermal water not just once, but over a prolonged period, sufficient for stable bacterial colonization on skin and hair follicles. This meant he had remained near or directly within the vapor zone of hot springs for many days, possibly weeks continuously, rather than merely passing through a geothermal area and leaving promptly. From these analyses, the forensics team concluded that Elias had spent a significant period in terrain featuring stable active hot springs belonging to one of the two Mirror Plateau hot springs clusters or Mist Creek Basin, with strong probability leaning toward Mirror Plateau due to the high match in silica composition and bacterial structure. This finding not only dramatically narrowed the spatial range where Elias could have been during his 4 missing years, but also indicated he had not wandered randomly but had lived, or been held, near a fixed hydrothermal source. With the water forensics layer having established a general geographic baseline, the forensics team proceeded to the second analysis layer to clarify Elias's actual survival environment. Ash samples and microscopic plant material lodged in the respiratory tract, hair follicles, and epidermis. From bronchial wash and nasopharyngeal fluid samples, they isolated 2 distinct ash particle groups, one exhibiting cellulose combustion structures characteristic of lodgepole pine, the other showing porous, pitted fibers of cottonwood under high heat, low oxygen burning conditions. Under electron microscopy of hair samples, a fine adherent layer of blackened silica mixed with plant charcoal was observed, with uniform microparticle diameters, a feature typical of static combustion environments rather than spreading wildfires or open-air fires. Cross-referencing these 2 ash types with the Yellowstone and Shoshone wildfire databases for 2017-2021, the analysis team quickly determined the samples did not match open wildfire characteristics. Lodgepole pine ash from natural fires typically contains gas bubbles, long carbon fibers, and distorted mineral components due to fluctuating temperatures, whereas Elias's samples were uniform and showed no signs of strong wind or oxygen circulation. This ruled out the possibility that he had been near or passed through any wildfire zones in the 4 years. Similarly, the cottonwood ash in the samples lacked oil smoke staining, synthetic soot marks, and incorporated soil particles common when campers burn mixed firewood. Instead, the ash structure indicated combustion in an enclosed, wind-limited environment with no dispersal of secondary combustible material, features consistent with confined spaces such as deep rock alcoves, dilapidated old cabins, or wind-sheltered artificial structures where fire was maintained long-term and repeatedly. Combining the ash data with the water source analysis, the forensics team focused on geographic areas where lodgepole pine and cottonwood coexist in proximity, a vegetation structure found only in certain narrow valleys traversed by warm streams. Based on Yellowstone's ecological mapping models, these conditions matched only a narrow band on the eastern side of Mirror Plateau, where lodgepole pine grows at cooler elevations, while cottonwood appears exclusively along high-humidity, warm watercourses. The presence of ash from both species in Elias's biological samples indicated he had inhabited an environment with repeated burning cycles, with fuel sources varying seasonally or by accessibility. After delineating the vegetation zone, the analysis team measured ash particle density, char fragment structure, and mineral content in hair samples to estimate accumulation over time. Measurements showed Elias had been exposed to ash over an extended period, not days, but potentially months or years, with stable density, proving the fire source was recurrent at the same location, or within an unchanging combustion environment. Based on all evidence, the forensics team determined this ash environment could not have been a campsite, an open campfire, or any wildfire from 2017-2021. It must have originated from an enclosed or semi-enclosed fire point where wind was restricted and ash was not widely dispersed. Overlaying the vegetation map, ash map, and verified hydrothermal data onto Yellowstone's topographic map, the plausible range narrowed to approximately 70 square kilometers, centered on the rarely trodden edges of Mirror Plateau and a portion of Mist Creek Basin. These are areas that possess hot springs, lodgepole pine, cottonwood ecological structure, and sufficient isolation to sustain a concealed fire source long-term without detection. The conclusion from the ash analysis layer reinforced the determination that Elias had lived, or been held, at a fixed location for an extended period, where fire was regularly maintained and situated deep within terrain, virtually inaccessible to outsiders. As the holding location gradually became clear, in terms of space and survival conditions, the central question of the investigation shifted from where Elias was to how he managed to leave there. From this point, the investigative team moved to reconstructing the escape process, drawing directly from what Elias left in his journal, along with the forensic samples collected from his body. They began by analyzing the detailed descriptions of the cabin structure that Elias recorded across multiple pages, notes about the door rattling violently during major storms, the sound of hinges clattering when wind shifted direction, and how, after prolonged rain, the door frame no longer closed completely, while the hinges had slipped out of their original alignment. These descriptions allowed the inference that the cabin was built from rough, untreated wood prone to swelling with moisture, with metal hinges that had deteriorated over time. This construction caused the latch to lose stability during sudden humidity spikes, creating a gap sufficient for internal force to dislodge the latch. Next, the meteorology team cross-referenced the weather descriptions in the journal with storm data from 2017 to 2021. Elias recorded a storm, lasting many hours, with strong winds shaking the entire cabin frame, and described water flowing across the cabin floor one night at the end of September. When matched, only one major storm at the end of September 2021 aligned with all elements: wind speed, wind direction, rainfall volume, and the timing of the low-pressure system sweeping across Mirror Plateau. This timing was just days before Elias appeared on trail cam, fitting a reasonable time frame for an exhausted person to escape, travel, and reach the recorded position. The forensic analysis of Elias's body further reinforced the hypothesis of an escape occurring precisely during the stormy night. The metal constriction mark on his left ankle showed signs of sudden lateral compression, indicating the metal restraint had been forcibly bent rather than slipping or wearing away naturally. Additionally, the layered mud adhering to Elias's body had distinct strata. The lower layer contained minerals characteristic of hot springs, while the upper layer held cold clay mud from moss meadows, proving continuous movement through two different ecological zones in an uninterrupted journey. The degree of tearing in his rags and frayed fabric fibers indicated prolonged contact with sharp rocks and tree trunks, consistent with crawling, dragging, or unsteady walking. From the bodily injuries, the level of exhaustion at discovery, and the distance from the second scene to the trail cam location, the investigative team calculated the plausible travel radius during the period from escape to the moment Elias was captured on camera. Based on the walking speed of a debilitated person, post-escape physical shock, and terrain changes, the reasonable travel range was estimated at only about 4 or 6 kilometers. When this estimate was overlaid on the topographic map, the trail camera coordinates fell exactly within the feasible zone, confirming Elias had moved along the downslope gradient of the terrain, following gentle slopes and water gullies to minimize the risk of detection. The investigative team's expert conclusion determined Elias had exploited the high humidity from the late September 2021 storm, which caused the cabin hinges to swell with moisture and reduce the latch's holding force. This allowed him to apply sufficient force to burst the door open and escape. After leaving the holding site, Elias became disoriented and moved instinctively toward lower terrain for survival, avoiding open roads, crossing two distinct ecosystems until exhaustion left him capable only of limping, perfectly matching the condition captured on trail cam. This reconstruction not only identified the escape mechanism and a reasonable time frame, but also provided a relatively clear movement trajectory prior to Elias's discovery at the second scene. From that foundation, the investigative team advanced to the next phase, creating a comprehensive spatial map by integrating all data from the 3 forensic layers, along with geological, metallic, and descriptive journal information. The starting point was the water source data, which showed Elias had prolonged contact with the microbial signature of silica-rich thermal springs, thereby narrowing the investigation to 2 stable geothermal clusters around Mirror Plateau and Mist Creek Basin. Next, The ash and vegetation data layer completely eliminated open areas, wildfire zones, or camping sites, while pointing to a concealed, wind-restricted, cyclically repeated burning environment with primary materials of lodgepole pine and cottonwood. This paired structure appeared only in a few narrow valleys where pine forest met warm streamside vegetation. The metal data layer from skin samples at the ankle and microparticles in the epidermis indicated prolonged contact with rusted iron material, a low-impurity alloy common in old hinges or handmade shackles, suggesting the holding structure was not a modern construction. Soil particle samples adhering to Elias were reanalyzed. The sediment composition showed a high rhyolite ratio, but no obsidian, indicating the area was not near the southern Yellowstone lava fields, but leaned toward the northeast, where soil was lightly weathered and mixed with precipitated silica from geothermal sources. Elias's journal, though not yet fully decoded, described the cabin as frequently damp, with swelling wooden walls during rainy seasons, a low ceiling, a single door, and the sound of flowing water, not far, but out of sight. When all data were combined, the analysis team generated a set of criteria. 1 must be near a stable thermal spring source. 2 must lie within mixed lodgepole pine, cottonwood vegetation. 3 must be sufficiently concealed to sustain repeated burning. 4 must match the geological soil profile. 5 must be in an area without trails or public access. 6 must fall within a 4-6 kilometers radius from the trail cam appearance position. When all these data layers were overlaid on Yellowstone's geographic map using GIS, most central or roadside areas were immediately eliminated. Regions with high tourist density or frequent ranger patrols were also excluded as incompatible with the possibility of a secret cabin operating undetected for years. After the final filtering round, only one band of approximately 20 square kilometers remained on the eastern edge of Lamar Valley, extending up the western slope of Mirror Plateau, meeting every criterion: remote terrain, low tree density interspersed with geothermal patches, high humidity, narrow valleys, limiting wind, and proximity to a hot spring outflow channel. This area had rarely been surveyed due to complex terrain, visited only sporadically by wildlife research drones on long cycles, with no official trails leading in. After designating this range as the potential holding zone, the investigative team developed a multi-layered approach plan. First, drones were adjusted for lower altitude flights, scanning terrain with optical and infrared cameras focused on geometric anomalies such as straight lines, box shapes, sloped roofs, or thermal hotspots. Simultaneously, a special reconnaissance team advanced from the Lamar Valley edge along natural features, fissures, watercourses, and sparse forest patches to avoid noise or trace leaving. Yellowstone Rangers, experienced in inaccessible zones, were assigned to guide and identify potential old cabin sites based on vegetation indicators, standing dead pine clusters, isolated cottonwood appearances, or areas of unusual ground compression. The plan emphasized simultaneous approach from 3 directions to rapidly shrink the search space and avoid missing small concealed structures. Mapping via multiple data layers allowed the investigative team, for the first time since 2017, to define a clear, plausible range containing Elias's holding location for over 4 years, while laying the scientific groundwork for an organized, evidence-based field approach rather than relying on guesswork or broad searches as in the initial missing person phase. Thermal drones deployed along the established route began scanning the 20 square kilometers area east of Lamar Valley, focusing on zones with thermal or structural anomalies. During the 3rd flight pass on the following morning, infrared sensors detected a cluster of low but stable heat signals beneath dense vegetation cover. Switching to optical camera with increased magnification, imagery revealed a box-shaped structure partially buried underground, with a roof covered in rough wood and soil, surrounded by small circular patches of dead vegetation, hallmarks of an old semi-subterranean cabin. After coordinate cross-check, the investigative team confirmed this as the sole man-made structure within the designated zone. A reconnaissance team of rangers and special investigators approached from 3 directions using silent approach protocol to preserve evidence. At close range, the cabin appeared as a deteriorated wooden structure with misaligned door hinges, moss-covered walls, and slight roof collapse. The door was unlocked but wedged shut with a rotten wooden bar. Inside, the cabin was dark with pervasive damp odor and thick soot accumulation on surfaces. The investigative team conducted a systematic four-quadrant sweep. At the south wall corner, a sunken ash pit hearth was discovered. The ash inside was uniformly black, with a base layer of fine white silica and carbon fragments, all matching the lodgepole pine and cottonwood ash components recovered from Elias's body. In the opposite corner, investigators found a thin metal cable approximately 1 meter long, with twisted ends and rust consistent with the metal samples from Elias's ankle region. Abrasion marks on the wall near the cable indicated prolonged use for restraining a person. Nearby, a makeshift water system of wooden troughs and small metal piping leading out the back of the cabin was located. The conduit showed mineral scale characteristic of silica-rich hot springs. Comparison with bacterial and mineral samples from Elias's skin yielded complete matches. Along the cabin floor, multiple soil samples were collected. Some contained lightly weathered rhyolite sediment, others silica-rich warm spring mud, also matching the multi-layered mud found on Elias. The match ratio approached absolute, ruling out the cabin as a random shelter. During inspection of the makeshift wooden bed area, an investigator discovered a bundle of torn paper fragments beneath an old canvas cloth. Preliminary reassembly showed these to be pencil-written journal pages, with handwriting matching the notebook found on Elias. Much of the content was erased or blurred by moisture, but keywords such as lock, rain, metal sound, not allowed, outside remained legible. This indicated the cabin was not merely Elias's residence, but directly tied to his captivity. On the interior wall, investigators noted tally mark scratches for counting days, some clusters extending to hundreds of strokes, proving the victim's long-term presence in the space. Faint scratch marks on the inner door surface at Elias's approximate hand height reinforced conclusions of repeated escape attempts over time. Rangers examining the cabin exterior also found anomalous ecological traces. Vegetation around the cabin showed patchy die-off from long-term smoke exposure, and a narrow path leading in was not animal-made, but repeated human compression, though no longer fresh. After collecting all samples, the forensics team compiled the data and determined this semi-subterranean cabin met every forensic criterion for the holding site. Heat source, water source, ash, metal, geology, and journal all matched at high levels. The cabin was thereby confirmed as the place where Elias Mercer had been held for an extended period before escaping, marking the largest breakthrough since the case was reopened. During expanded examination of the cabin, the investigative team discovered a series of shallow shoe prints around the structure's perimeter, preserved beneath old duff and well-maintained by stable humidity. The prints showed a high rubber sole work boot with V-pattern tread, large size, not typical trekking footwear. Cross-referenced against civilian and military footwear databases, the pattern matched a limited production line manufactured 2013-2016, sold primarily in mountainous regions of Idaho and Montana. From the tread pattern code, investigators contacted outdoor equipment stores around Idaho Falls where the line had been distributed. One store north of the city confirmed selling a matching pair to a male customer who provided no address and paid cash in early 2016. Internal camera footage from that period had been overwritten, but purchase records noted the customer also bought raw forging supplies, short-handled forging hammer, carbon steel wire, metal chisel, and solid steel hinge set, all items found inside the cabin. From there, the investigative team shifted to analyzing forging tool marks recovered from the cabin. Each blacksmith tends to leave a mechanical signature, hammer depth, cutting angle, edge grinding style, due to personal habit and customized tools. Comparison of workmanship marks on the cabin hinges, door frame, and twisted cable segment showed complete matches with records of several reclusive blacksmiths in the Wyoming-Idaho border region. After elimination, only one individual remained with a fitting profile, Caleb Hartman, 51 years old, Idaho resident, trained in traditional blacksmithing, who disappeared from social life in 2009 after closing his small forge shop outside Ashton. Hartman was described as highly skilled in survival, having lived months at a time in the western Yellowstone forest and frequently purchasing forging materials with cash. Forestry Service archives recorded Hartman receiving a warning in 2011 for building an unauthorized wooden structure near park boundaries. Expanded federal transaction queries revealed Hartman purchased large quantities of thin iron cable, forging hammers, and wood saw blades during 2014-2016, the likely construction period for the forest cabin. Telecommunications records showed Hartman had used no phone since 2012. His driver's license expired without renewal. No bank transactions, all dealings cash or mountain barter networks. Indirect positioning data from prior wildlife cameras showed a tall male figure appearing sporadically in Mirror Plateau and Mist Creek Basin areas, carrying homemade gear with iron framing, consistent with a wandering blacksmith. The combined match of shoe prints, forging tools, cabin location, and Hartman's long-term societal withdrawal established him as the prime suspect in Elias Mercer's captivity. The investigative team compiled a catalog of all points where Hartman had appeared or been indirectly recorded over the years, while building a behavioral profile based on his survival capabilities, tool-making habits, and ability to construct concealed structures deep in the wilderness. These data laid the foundation for the next step, determining motive, range of movement, and traces indicating Hartman's presence near the cabin throughout Elias's captivity period. Immediately after the semi-subterranean cabin was confirmed as Elias Mercer's holding site and suspect Caleb Hartman's identity was established, investigative forces deployed an expanded reconnaissance team to secure the broader area. However, when rangers returned to the cabin the following morning to continue scene mapping, they discovered fresh movement signs around the vegetation edge, still damp compressed moss, lightly disturbed topsoil heading northwest, indicating someone had approached the cabin overnight and departed upon detecting signs of outside presence. Investigators assessed that Caleb had returned to check his old hideout, realized the cabin had been discovered, and immediately fled, using the instincts of someone long accustomed to living off-grid. Drones were urgently deployed, sweeping a 5-7 kilometers arc around the cabin, focusing on routes typically used by experienced survivalists. Glacial fracture lines, game trails, boulder field edges, and forest canopy overlaps forming concealed passages. Infrared cameras detected a fast-moving heat signature along steep terrain toward forested basins near Mist Creek. A K-9 team was released simultaneously from the south to follow the fresh scent left around the cabin. The dogs quickly locked onto a narrow trail, indicating the suspect was moving continuously without pause. The coordination unit constructed an escape route map based on habits of long-term hunters and survivalists. They typically avoid open trails, favor terraced terrain, follow watercourse edges without staying on main streams. Overlaying drone data with K-9 signals, the pursuit team determined Caleb was following a natural north-northwest corridor, approaching the confluence of small drainages into the Yellowstone River. Experienced rangers noted that this terrain is often used by illegal hunters and off-grid survivalists as a cross-country cut to evade helicopter detection due to thick canopy and numerous rock crevices for cover. The drone switched to low-level tracking mode, using thermal sensors to detect small heat differentials between a human body and the forest environment. By early afternoon, the drone located a human-sized heat signature moving rapidly toward a flooded meadow near the riverbank. Ground pursuit teams were ordered to tighten the perimeter using triangular compression tactics, while a veteran ranger shadowed the right flank where rough terrain could cause the suspect to slip. As forces closed on the riverbank, they observed large fresh footprints, deeply impressed in new mud, length and width, matching Caleb's shoe size. A discarded thin cable segment near tree roots further confirmed the suspect was attempting to shed identifying items. At this point, Caleb had reached the river edge and attempted to cross by wading a shallow section. The drone captured imagery of him carrying a small cloth bag and a long-handled wooden tool. Strong river current slowed him midstream. The capture team immediately executed a two-bank encirclement. One group pressed from upstream to block upward escape, The other moved cross-river on the gentler opposite bank. As Caleb stepped onto the north shore, 2 rangers blocked his path, ordering him to drop the bag and raise his hands. Caleb bolted into brush, but was overtaken by the K9 within seconds and forced to the ground. Police quickly subdued, cuffed, and searched him for safety. Seized evidence included a cloth bag containing rusted hinge-like metal fragments, a small forging chisel, and torn paper sheets similar to those found in the cabin. All items were sealed and transported in standard evidence containers to prevent contamination. With the successful apprehension of Caleb Hartman while crossing the Yellowstone River, the investigative team officially concluded the suspect pursuit phase and transitioned the case to statement collection, evidence consolidation, and analysis of Caleb's direct role in constructing the cabin and holding Elias Mercer captive for years. Caleb Hartman was taken to the temporary holding facility at Mammoth District for interrogation and behavioral psychological evaluation, beginning with an assessment of the suspect's level of cooperation. In the first session, Caleb remained almost completely silent, confirming only his name and refusing an attorney because he did not trust the legal system, a posture consistent with his long-documented history of social withdrawal. When questioned about the cabin, Elias Mercer, or his reason for appearing near the scene the previous night, Caleb gave no answers, repeating only a few defensive phrases that indicated extremely low cooperation potential. Investigators shifted to analyzing Caleb's flight behavior to compare it with inferred actions at the cabin. His escape route, following terraced terrain, avoiding trails, utilizing vegetation cover and rock crevices, was a pattern typical of individuals with advanced survival skills and long familiarity with controlling their operational space. Compared to the cabin, the semi-subterranean holding structure, makeshift water system, ability to sustain fire in an enclosed environment, and evidence of periodic metal restraint fixation of the victim, all reflected a consistent behavioral model: control, isolation, self-sufficiency, absolute dominance in a segregated environment. Behavioral psychology specialists compiled a profile based on 3 characteristic clusters. 1. Prolonged isolation pattern, demonstrated by Caleb's withdrawal from society since 2009, severance of all contacts, no phone use, no financial transactions, and complete self-determined rhythm of life. 2. Spatial control pattern, shown through the concealed construction of the cabin outside all access routes, with custom locking mechanisms and specific movement corridors. 3. Deviant survival pattern, involving Caleb's combination of blacksmithing skills with survival expertise to create an environment capable of sustaining himself while simultaneously controlling another person. The analysis team concluded that Caleb exhibited behavior aligned with a solitary territorial type, an individual who views deep wilderness as exclusive property, thereby claiming sole authority over who may be present in that space. His flight upon discovery of the cabin showed consistency in the pattern, avoiding direct confrontation while employing every means to retain control over his escape route and prevent others from closing in on his space. The second interrogation focused on confronting sealed evidence with forging tools recovered from the cabin. Although Caleb continued to refuse to respond, his fixed stare at the presented items and facial muscle tension when the cabin was mentioned allowed specialists to classify these as behavioral triggering agents, indicating the cabin held central significance in his operational system. Based on all observed manifestations, the behavioral psychology team constructed an official profile. Caleb exhibited a behavioral structure shaped by prolonged isolation, high-level environmental control capability, ability to maintain a rudimentary yet effective detention system, and strong psychological reactivity to intrusion into what he considered his space. The profile concluded that Caleb was likely to remain uncooperative throughout legal proceedings and highly probable to continue evading responsibility through sustained silence. All behavioral analysis, interrogation data, nonverbal cues, and verified physical evidence documentation were standardized into a federal investigative file, including risk assessment, control, isolation pattern description, and long-term detention capability profile, to be forwarded to the U.S. Attorney's Office as the basis for prosecution and indictment construction against Caleb Hartman. The U.S. Attorney's Office proceeded to consolidate all investigative data to form the official indictment against Caleb Hartman, with the core focus on proving a fully closed forensic chain that linked every disparate evidence layer into a unified sequence of events. Elias Mercer was held captive for an extended period by a specific individual at a determined location, using intentional means and conditions. First, the water source forensic layer proved Elias had prolonged contact with silica-rich thermal spring systems, perfectly matching microbial and mineral signatures found only around hot spring clusters in the eastern Mirror Plateau band. The second forensic layer concerning ash and vegetation showed lodgepole pine and cottonwood ash deposited in Elias's respiratory tract and hair follicles, exhibited enclosed, low-oxygen, cyclically repeated combustion characteristics, matching ash recovered from the cabin's fire pit. The metal forensic layer from the constriction mark on Elias's ankle contained rusted iron alloy consistent with the cabin's cable and hinges, bearing forging marks matching handmade blacksmith tools. The mineral layer demonstrated soil adhering to Elias's body, comprising microcrystalline silica, weathered rhyolite and warm spring mud, perfectly matched sediment types surrounding the semi-subterranean cabin. When this material data was combined with the journal, a logical sequence emerged. Elias described the cabin door rattling in storms, misaligned hinges, nearby hot water source, low ceiling structure, metal sounds, and restricted freedom of movement, all consistent with the field-recovered cabin. The cabin's discovery via thermal drone, precisely within the 20 square kilometer zone, narrowed by forensic cross-referencing, closed the loop on identifying the holding location. Trail camera imagery, capturing Elias in an exhausted state, several kilometers from the cabin, provided the temporal link, demonstrating escape occurred close to the late September 2021 storm. The on-site recovery of Elias, carrying the journal, and bearing injuries, consistent with the detention mechanism, completed the evidence chain from environment cabin victim. This closed forensic chain was presented in the indictment as a system independent of testimony, capable of standing alone under federal evidentiary standards. The prosecutors listed 4 primary felony charges: kidnapping, unlawful restraint, torture, and attempted murder. To reinforce the indictment, federal prosecutors presented 3 supporting evidence models: digital path including synchronized GPS and phone signal loss data, proving external interference in the victim's movement; material trace, encompassing ash, metal, soil, minerals, microbes, and mechanical evidence at the cabin; environmental trace, featuring enclosed combustion characteristics, vegetation samples, water source structure, and cabin location, perfectly matching the suspect's activity zone. When layered together, these 3 models formed a unified evidence network. The victim was transported to a fixed deep forest point, kept alive under detention conditions, documented the process in a journal, and escaped when the cabin structure weakened. Federal prosecutors concluded that no reasonable alternative hypothesis fit the entire collected forensic system, and therefore the indictment against Caleb Hartman met federal legal standards for trial. The federal trial of Caleb Hartman opened at the Wyoming Federal District Court after nearly a year of preparation, with a central focus on the closed forensic chain constructed by the prosecution. In the main presentation, prosecutors sequentially introduced every evidence layer, perfect match, between hot spring microbes on Elias's body and Mirror Plateau spring clusters, lodgepole, pine, cottonwood, enclosed combustion ash in Elias's lungs, and hair matching the cabin fire pit, rusted iron alloy from the ankle constriction, matching cabin cable and hinges, weathered rhyolite and microcrystalline silica minerals on victim's skin and nails, matching surrounding cabin geology, journal descriptions of detention structure, matching the scene. Cabin location exactly within the 20 square kilometers, forensic narrowed zone, and finally trail camera data, plus victim recovery condition, proving escape from this holding site. The prosecution's presentation flowed seamlessly, each segment supported by independent expert reports and quantitative comparison documentation, transforming individual links into a unified, nearly unbreakable evidence chain. The defense attempted several counterarguments, centered on the possibility that the cabin was a random shelter or that the victim self-inflicted injuries while lost. But these claims rapidly weakened when forensic experts demonstrated ash, mineral, and metal structures indicated multi-year exposure periods, impossible in a standard lost hiker scenario. The defense also tried to question the accuracy of shoe prints and forging tools, but mechanical comparison reports from metallurgy experts completely refuted this by identifying hammer marks with a mechanical signature uniquely matching Hartman's forging style on record. Additionally, the defense could not explain the torn journal fragments, paper pieces found in Caleb's bag upon arrest, or the suspect's precise appearance at the cabin area immediately after scene discovery. All counterarguments failed to produce a sufficiently coherent alternative hypothesis to dismantle the forensic chain. After both sides concluded arguments, the judge submitted the case to the jury for deliberation on the 4 primary charges: kidnapping, unlawful restraint, torture, and attempted murder. The jury reached unanimous agreement on all counts in under 7 hours, determining that Caleb Hartman had held Elias Mercer captive for over 4 years, inflicted serious injury, and abandoned the victim in a life-threatening state. At sentencing, the judge emphasized the exceptionally grave nature of the case: prolonged detention duration, complete societal isolation of the holding location, physical and psychological coercive conditions, and the defendant's high degree of preparation and intent. The federal court imposed a sentence of life imprisonment without parole, citing 18 U.S. Code provisions on kidnapping and torture, classifying Hartman's conduct as the highest level of violation of personal liberty on federal land. The sentence was pronounced with full jury concurrence and recorded as one of the rare cases in which a closed environmental, material, journal forensic chain served as the foundational basis for conviction. Although the federal prosecution process concluded with a life without parole sentence for Caleb Hartman, the investigative team maintained an open catalog of unresolved investigative leads based on elements in case WICC 2117 that could not be fully decoded. First, Elias Mercer's journal, while pivotal in establishing the escape mechanism and cabin description, still contained over 30 unexplained symbols. These symbols appeared cyclically, often placed beside descriptions of weather or captor activity. Criminal linguistics specialists suggested they may represent time markers, psychological states, or self-encoded indicators by Elias to prevent detection if the journal fell into the captor's hands. Decoding these symbols could potentially pinpoint exact durations of detention phases, frequency of interactions between Elias and Caleb, or the existence of additional structures beyond the discovered cabin. Additionally, cabin examination revealed a second shoe print, smaller in size, with a different sole pattern from Caleb's footwear, located near the rear door area. This print lay deep beneath old duff, proving it was not left by investigative personnel. The owner remains unidentified, and data is insufficient to determine whether it represents a prior visitor to the cabin, another victim, or merely an old print predating Caleb's occupation of the area. Water forensic analysis also indicated a secondary water source, a microbial strain, not fully matching the Mirror Plateau hot spring cluster. This strain appeared at extremely low density, with cooler temperature characteristics, belonging to cool spring types scattered in eastern Yellowstone National Park. This suggests the possibility Elias was transported through another site besides the cabin, or that Caleb utilized multiple water access points seasonally. The unidentified secondary water source location has prevented the forensic geology team from completing a full suspect movement map over the 4 years. Furthermore, re-examination of archived wildlife drone data from 2019 revealed an anomalous structure approximately 1.8 kilometers southeast of the cabin in one infrared image. The structure appeared as a flattened circular form, with a low but stable central heat signature, not consistent with animal bedding. Because no criminal suspicion existed at that time, the image was not flagged for investigation. The subsequent discovery and forensic match of Caleb's semi-subterranean cabin raises the possibility that the 2019 anomaly could represent an auxiliary dugout, storage cache, or temporary holding site. Mirror Plateau's edge terrain contains numerous rock alcoves and soft, damp soil ideal for excavation, so the possibility that Caleb constructed multiple structures beyond a single cabin cannot be ruled out. Finally, based on unmatched elements such as the second shoe print, secondary water source, and unverified structure from drone imagery, the investigative team recommended opening an assessment of potential additional victims beyond Elias Mercer. The journal contains passages alluding to strange noises and someone else was here, though too vague for conclusion. The cabin also shows wall wear marks at heights inconsistent with Elias, and tally mark counts exceeding the time frame of Elias's captivity. Federal prosecutors requested continued collection of information on unresolved missing persons cases along the eastern Yellowstone rim from 2005 to 2017, cross-referenced against the unidentified shoe print and ecological indicators around the cabin. Each of these leads, while insufficient to open a new case at present, indicates that the forest where Elias was held may conceal more secrets than those revealed at trial. The story of Elias Mercer, an experienced backcountry hiker who was nevertheless abducted and held captive for 4 years in a remote corner of Yellowstone, reflects an important reality in contemporary American life. The country possesses vast, beautiful natural spaces that are also fraught with danger, where thorough preparation still does not guarantee absolute safety against individuals with malicious intent. Elias's sudden loss of contact, GPS disablement, and phone signal loss within minutes remind us that supporting technology cannot fully replace proactive safety measures. In the context of sharply rising outdoor recreation participation in the U.S. post-pandemic, the lesson from Elias is clear: always share detailed route plans with multiple people. Establish check-in times and never venture far off-trail alone, even when confident in your skills. Another lesson comes from the search and investigative system. Initial SAR teams could not locate Elias because they relied on traditional lost hiker assumptions. The case underscores the importance of the outdoor community sharing accurate, up-to-date information and of local agencies being better equipped with environmental tracking technology. The cabin's discovery, through the combination of ash, water microbes, minerals, and journal, reminds us that in the United States, nature has memory. Every trace left in the environment, whether lodgepole pine ash, hot spring silica, or metal rust, can become evidence. Finally, the case highlights a distinctly American truth. Elias's survival stemmed not only from personal will, but from a robust, coordinated system involving SAR, rangers, drones, and federal forensics. The lesson for everyone: do not rely solely on yourself in the wilderness. Rely on community, on systems designed to protect life, and always respect both the power and the danger of American nature. Thank you for joining me in exploring the extraordinary survival journey of Elias Mercer. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other deeply investigated real cases like this. See you in the next video, where we continue tracking the mysteries hidden across the vast expanse of America.